Hello, everyone, and welcome to this forum on water issues with Mark Arax, the author of The Dreamt Land, Chasing Water and Dust Across California. Thanks for joining us. We're going to start the discussion with Mark in a few minutes and then open up the conversation to our panel of experts and leaders from Glenn and Butte Counties and the surrounding region. Joining us later on will be Ritta Martin, the Glenn County Farm Bureau President, Debra Lucero, the Butte County Supervisor, Stephen Tchudi, the AquAlliance Board Chair, Bruce Roundy, Orland Mayor, Thad Bettner, General Manager of the Glenn-Colusa Irrigation District, David Kehn of Cal Water and the Glenn County Groundwater Authority Technical Advisory Committee. My name's Todd Bishop, and I'm a business and technology journalist and one of the co-founders of GeekWire, which is a technology news site. I volunteer my time to report on the community issues in my hometown of Orland, California, in Glenn County. And as you may see behind me, I'm coming to you from the edge of the canal behind the house where I grew up. This is not a virtual background. This, in fact, is Lateral 40. It is part of the Orland Unit Water Users Association, and it's a result of the pioneering Orland project, which was the first federal reclamation project in California more than 100 years ago. It brought water from the mountains to the west, giving life to the agricultural economy that has fueled this community for more than a century. The water that you see and perhaps hear flowing behind me is the third day of the fifth irrigation of this year. It's possibly the second to last irrigation of this year. Last year, there was enough water flowing from the mountains into the reservoirs for 17 irrigations through the Orland project. This year, we'll be fortunate to get to 6. On the outskirts of town, more than 75 domestic wells have gone dry, compared to right around 30 in the prior drought. And I know from talking with farmers that there are serious concerns about the harvest this fall. And I also know from my own reporting that people are scared and they're frustrated. And in some cases, they're not very happy with their neighbors. And that's the situation we're facing in the community right now. And that's why I thought a conversation with Mark Arax would be helpful. Mark comes from a family of farmers in the Central Valley. He's a former reporter for the LA Times and the author of multiple books. As a journalist, he has doggedly pursued the truth in covering water issues, and nowhere is that more evident than in his book, The Dreamt Land, which is centered around the state's 5-year drought from 2012 to 2016. Mark, thank you very much for joining us for this.
Hey, Todd, it's great to be with you. Thank you for all the work you've done on it.
Absolutely. So, Mark, we're going to
I love that the backdrop is really something. I mean, I was looking at a photo today that someone had shot the bridge over the Kehn River, where a sign says "No diving off this bridge," and it was just desert. The whole run of the river was desert ground, which is not unusual here because we take about 95% of the flow of the rivers and shunt them over to agriculture. But just the contrast with your scene is quite stunning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up with this as the backdrop. I literally am looking at my backyard in my parents' house where I grew up, and this was an ever-present sound in my life. And I didn't realize growing up just how important it was and how amazing it was that it was running as much as it did back then.
It's a miracle, man. It's a miracle, is what we're seeing.
Mark, can you start by giving us your high-level assessment of the current situation with the drought in California? What's different this time? Have we learned anything from the last time when you published your last book? And what are you hearing now from the people you're talking with in your reporting?
So I'm reading headlines. I'm seeing journalists parachuting from the East Coast, the Guardian out of England. So it's all the same stories, basically. I read a story yesterday that the drought is making hornets more angry. I mean, this is all the stuff that we read just 4, 5, 6 years ago. It's the kind of journalism that actually frustrated me back then, because I felt like they were capturing this certain aspect of the drought, but they weren't going deep enough to see how we got there. Drought is a fascinating time because it reveals all lies. It reveals the lie of the system, that it can extend that far and feed that many people. farmers, suburbia, all that. So I don't know that, I think this is a replay of that. We were interrupted by a year or two of floods, but to me it feels like almost one drawn out extended drought. And I'm not sure any lessons were learned. They never are. I mean, we're a people out here who, as soon as flood comes, we forget all about drought. And then when drought hits us again, we're actually stunned, even if it's a year or two just from the last one. Out of the 1861-1862 flood, William Brewer, who was, traveling through California doing all these surveys, that flood, he talked about the tendency of Californians to have amnesia, to forget, and that amnesia was kind of their strength, because they were able to continue to persevere and go on. And it is a strength in a way, but it's also our curse. So, I don't see a lot of difference. I'd like to be able to say that lessons were learned out of that last drought, but as we talk a little bit more, I'll discuss, the footprint of agriculture and the footprint of suburbia that's only expanded since the last drought.
Mark, it's interesting because obviously a lot of your reporting is on big ag, and you really dove into some particular examples in a lot of your books and your reporting. I was just talking after church with, my mom and her friends. There are family farms here as well. And I think one of the things that I've been really careful to do in my own conversations and reporting, and I know you're careful with as well, you're friends with folks who are raising orchards and very much heavily involved in ag. How can we, big picture, make sure that we aren't dividing ourselves
and demonizing, right? So in the book, I spend as much time with small, medium-sized growers as I do with the Resnicks and writing about the Boswells. I'm reminded of John Kirkpatrick, who has been farming for 75 years now in Tulare County along the foothills of the Sierra. And he's got some pre-1914 water rights, and he's growing citrons, which is kind of a ugly lemon. And he's gotten into partnership over the years with rabbis from the East Coast who value this citron so much for religious holidays because it represents a kind of cycle of life. That, he's selling some of these citrons, the diamonds he calls them, for $80-$90, sometimes $150 a piece, the flawless, perfect ones. So yeah, we have to make these distinctions. We have to make distinctions. There's a tendency of outsiders to look at the Central Valley as one big landscape. Well, it is in some ways, but the farming in the Sacramento Valley is quite a bit different than the farming in the San Joaquin Valley. The farming in the San Joaquin Valley is more industrialized. And yet, when you really get down into the dust of the San Joaquin Valley, you'll see that it is really three valleys. There's the east side, the citrus belt, where the farms are smaller and the draw of water is easier. There's actually rivers running through the ground. And the groundwater is not so deep, and you're growing a crop that's pretty profitable, so you could sustain a kind of small, farming. And the communities there are communities where the children of farm workers and the children of farmers go to school together. They're real agrarian kinds of communities like you have up there. Then you get to the center part of the San Joaquin Valley. Again, rivers running through it. Groundwater that's 60, 70, 80, maybe 100 feet deep, which is not deep by other standards. And Fowler, Selma, Kingsburg, the raisin capital of the world, this is where you see that. But then when you migrate to the west San Joaquin Valley, to Fresno County and Kern, you see a place that couldn't be more different. Smells different, tastes different. This is a place of industrialized agriculture where there are no rivers running through it, where the groundwater, if it's to be had, is had from 1,000, 2,000 feet deep. And the towns are incredibly impoverished. and the farmers don't live in those towns. They don't have that kind of psychic connection to those towns. And so this is a place of extreme poverty and extreme extraction. And this is where the pumping is going on. This year alone in the Westlands Water District, I would estimate that they're going to pump out of the ground 600 to 7,000 acre feet of water. Now, they're getting water from Boswell, who's pumping out of Tulare Lake, and they're getting water from you guys. You know, there's this exchange that's going on, and we can talk a bit more about that.
Mark, you mentioned earlier that you don't think we have learned as a state the lessons of the past drought and prior droughts. What are the key lessons that should have been learned?
Okay, we don't need climate change to have climate change. We have a very volatile weather pattern that is part of our DNA. It's our inherent weather, and it has these volatile, wild swings. And if you study the redwood, the rings in the redwoods and all that, you will see extended droughts and floods and, you know, things of that nature. The floods you can see in the sediment of the marine sediment. So we already have that. And to invent California, we had to invent the grandest water moving system in history, you know, to try to even out the differences of 1,000-mile long state where it's 140 inches of rain in one spot and 5 inches in the other. And we pulled that off. But the rub is that as we get bigger and there's more folks, wanting to use that system. I mean, the life of that system, if you look at the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project together as one, they happened at different times, but they're integrated as one. We've gone from 13 million Californians to 40 million. So the question is the system's cracking. We have reached a limit line, and now we have climate change on top of our own inherent weather. The swings are getting more wild. And things that maybe 5-10 years ago would have seemed NIMBYism are now things that we have to contemplate. You know, we keep talking about we need more affordable housing in the state of California. Well, where in the hell it's going to go? I mean, I was up in Paradise a couple years ago, and I was stunned to see that on that geologic chimney there, between two river canyons, they had planted 40,000 people right in the path of wildfire. And they're not alone. That's up and down the state. You know, a quarter of our population lives in the wildland-urban interface. And then you see farming, especially here in this part of the valley, spreading out more and more and more, so that folks who the last drought were taking out some orchards, replanted those orchards and then some. Their footprint grew even more. Now that is not heeding the lesson of drought. It's a kind of madness. And that madness, if you go back to our history, you can make the argument that the ethos of the gold rush has never left us. And yet climate change is now requiring a different way, so that you might be able to take a look at growth, suburban growth and farm growth, and maybe demand something else.
What about the issue of groundwater? And especially in a place like Northern California, I think we are perhaps not as far along in the use of groundwater, perhaps, as the Central Valley. What should we know about groundwater? What would you change? How do water transfers play into this? I know this will be a subject of discussion among our panel.
Yeah, we need to talk tonight about is groundwater. So you guys are in really good shape as far as we're concerned with groundwater. You got great recharge. I mean, the Sacramento River is runs a third more than the San Joaquin. So you guys got, and then you have all those other river systems feeding in. You're blessed with water that we don't have.
People don't feel necessarily blessed right now. I was just over at a water distribution event this afternoon at the Orland Fire Department. I mean, those folks do not feel blessed. I can tell you that.
No, we're getting drought on top of drought, and even a place of past surplus is suffering. And so the question becomes are you guys going to be pumping out of your groundwater and going deeper? You're going to go to that race to the bottom like we are already in the middle of. and then use your surface flows to sell water, south of the delta. And then the extraction becomes a way to backfill your water demands to keep your crops growing. I mean, that's a real shame. In a sense, you're exporting your groundwater. You're mining it and exporting it. It's a wash. It's a little bit of a laundering operation because water is fungible, but that's essentially what you're doing, and that's very disturbing. Does it make sense to sell water that would go to rice, partner up essentially with farmers south of the Delta that are growing almonds and pistachios? And that is something that in the singular might make sense, but as the aggregate happens, and we see kind of a tragedy of the commons, which plays out here with groundwater pumping, will you guys be following suit? So we're going to see a tremendous amount of groundwater pumping to sustain the footprint of agriculture. Sigma, we knew it was a long run up, but did we really know that it was going to be, that we were going to have to endure 2-3 droughts before it took effect? Yeah, that's what's happening. And when it takes effect, will the state Department of Water Resources have the manpower, the woman power, the wherewithal to actually impose the kind of limits on big agriculture that need to be imposed? We're farming 6 million acres in the San Joaquin Valley. The farmers that I talked to, almost every one of them conceded that we were farming a third too many acres. We're going to have to lose, let nature retake probably 1.5 million acres, 1 million to 1.5 million. I know the PPIC and the folks over there, their numbers are more modest, but this is what I see, and this is what the farmers concede to try to get back to sustainability. And that brings in questions of what kind of farming. Do mega dairies belong here with all the silage that's grown, all the water that goes to alfalfa? These are major questions that we can't kick down the road anymore. We have to answer.
I was fortunate to get to spend some time last week, and I'd like to start to bring in our panel with Thad Bettner of the Glenn-Colusa Irrigation District. And I know that they are often in the news over the issue of groundwater, over water transfers. And Thad, I do want to give you a chance. I'd love to hear, and you explain to me some of your approach and your philosophy on this, and what people should be thinking about when they think about groundwater transfers. And if you're in a position, Thad, to unmute and jump in at this point, I'd love to just hear what you have to say on perhaps dispelling some myths, talking about what ways that GCID and other irrigation districts operate as it relates to groundwater and water transfer. And Thad, if you're there and are able to jump in, I'd love to just sort of hear your thoughts building on what Mark just said.
Sure, Todd. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Okay. And yeah, Mark, thanks for your comment. And certainly I couldn't agree more about, lessons learned. And we in California tend to have short memories, and I know, when this year came upon us, one of the first things we did was actually go back to 2014 and 2015 and pull out all the actions that we took to try and get through those years, which were rough years, just like this year is, even though this year is now probably becoming one of the worst years on record ever. But one of the interesting things that we do, and I was talking with Todd about this last week, was we really look at what water we have available in our portfolio, primarily surface water, and we really try and match our supply and demand. And a lot of times we actually have to cut demand in our district in order to meet supply. In other words, we actually take land out of production because we don't have enough water to farm everything, and I think part of the actions, that we do from a surface water component annually, related to that, I think that's going to be part of the actions that Sigma is going to have to do going forward, in order just to make sure that, this idea of, do we have continuing to expand? Do we have ever expanding, supplies? I think that's where where we're getting to the point of we don't. And so what are the components that we have to bring in, both our surface water and our groundwater supply, into a balance? And that has to be sustainable, which obviously is one of the ideas of Sigma. So, we do that on an annual basis, and we did it this year. And I think, adding on to that, one of the components, is transfers. We do transfer surface water. We did it this year. And I think one of the purposes of that actually was to allow that water that we would otherwise use internally, which would have put a demand on the river and the environment, was to actually keep that water up in storage and move it in the fall and winter time, when it could provide an environmental service. So in other words, it's helping with Shasta Reservoir cold water pool, so that benefits winter run. Potentially that water could be moved at a timing that could help fall run in terms of helping supplement river flows. So, again, trying to use that water not just for a single purpose, but for multiple uses and multiple benefits. So again, that's a component, related to our surface water transfers. Again, it's a very small portion of our portfolio. And then we only use groundwater, as a last resort. We're pumping a little bit of groundwater this year, relatively small amount, but again, really focus on our normal to wet years where we can really focus on recharging the groundwater system, essentially a tune of over 100,000 acre feet a year we put in the groundwater system. So we do see that as necessary going forward to ensure the long-term sustainability of our basin within our district, including our neighbors.
Hey, that window to pump it through the delta, it's been, obviously, it's a point of big controversy. How open is that window? How many weeks is it? Have you seen a change from Trump administration to Biden administration, the way that window is being used? Is it winnowed down some, opened up some? How many weeks do you have to get that water south of the delta?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mark. And it's kind of dependent on your type and capacity and fish presence, so I think even under the Trump administration and moving to the new administration, I think the monitoring component is significant.
Yeah.
Credit to, Reclamation, DWR, and the fishery agencies. I mean, there is a massive fish monitoring effort, and I think, trying to move that water to ensure that there's not impacts to fish is really the priority. So going forward, will things change? I think that's yet to be seen, but certainly that monitoring is critical, both, from a historical standpoint and looking forward.
That I know one of the things that you explained to me when we spoke last week was that GCID closely monitors its wells and looks for a decrease in the aquifer. And obviously your wells are just some of the wells, but there are farmers in the district who are pumping as well. The concern I hear, and I'd love to get you to address this, and I know perhaps others want to jump in on this too, is water in is water in and water out is water out, and no one's necessarily accounting for the specific molecules going in from the groundwater or from the runoff. There is a concern about, even if it's legal, the ethics of still doing water transfers at a time when groundwater pumping is required, and whether those water transfers should at some point be cut off in seasons when the drought conditions are such that groundwater pumping is required. How do you address those kinds of concerns?
Well, I think it's probably threefold. One, certainly we're not pumping groundwater and transferring it. So I just want to be pretty clear about that we don't do that. And I know we have, at least out of basin, we did transfer some groundwater to our neighbors to the west. And that includes actually some of the districts in the Orland area. To help them, at least try and use surface water in lieu of groundwater. That's one item. Two, I do think we are very interested in a broader conversation about this. There is a 500,000 acre feet of groundwater pumping. I believe in the Colusa Basin, there's about 400,000 acre feet of groundwater pumping in the Butte Basin. So, around us, there's nearly 1 million acre feet of groundwater being pumped. And we're pumping, I think this year we'll pump about 20,000 acre feet.
Wow.
And so, we would rather have the conversation about, let's work as a basin and a region on sustainability. I know there tends to be a hyper focus on groundwater pumping or trying to connect transfers to groundwater pumping. But again, I think our focus rather be, how do we keep our region and our relative basin sustainable? And then from there, I think we can talk about how is that water used going forward. So, I think that really needs to be the conversation. I'm hoping that Sigma will get us there sooner than later, and I think certainly the more we can look at water budgets and kind of some of that checkbook accounting, we're willing to do that within our district. We do that already, but certainly in other parts of the basin through Sigma, certainly the folks participating today, we'd love to have that conversation.
Todd, could I ask a question? I recently, and this is probably to Mark and to Thad, I recently attended a California Water Commission meeting. It was the most recent meeting that they had, and they had several presentations on Sigma. And I would call it Sigma maybe 3.0. Seems like we're on 3.1 or we are on 1.0, all of us sub-basins up here, and they are already on 3.0. And that is the water market. What was said exactly is you can't sell it if you can't measure it. And they are measuring the groundwater in order to set up one of the most massive water markets there is. And Wall Street is extremely interested in this. And I'm just wondering how that sets us up. Do the small farmers understand that? Do the water districts understand that? They are talking about a pretty sophisticated system. And of course, it was with the idea that it would benefit communities that are having trouble accessing drinking water, like Orland right now. But I'm wondering if that's the case, if we have this rich amount of water here and it's still being traded elsewhere. How, maybe that's a question to you both.
Go ahead, Todd.
I think that was either a question for you or Thad, Mark.
Thad,
you want to start that off and give your perspective on that, and then I'll give it maybe a larger perspective.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Debra, for that question. I again, just working for our district, our landowners, and our board. Our priority is to serve our local community, our lands and environment first. That will always be the role that our district takes. And I think we have a lot of policies that address that. Certainly our board meetings are open to the public, and certainly folks can listen in and just hear pretty much that candor and focus by our board. So I think that's always going to be the case, and whether it's related to how we use water within our district to service over 1,200 landowners within our district, small family farms, that's what we intend to do. I certainly understand, and even our board understands the concern about water markets. But again, our goal is to, again, protect our communities, our backyard, where we live and work. And that's always going to be the case. I don't know how to articulate that stronger than that, but that's, again, really our focus. And I think it's pretty evident based on the actions that we take year in, year out.
So down here, let me just let you give you a sense of what's happening. So Lynn and Stuart Resnick, who are the biggest farmers in America, use more water than any couple in California. Their footprint and other big farming footprints have grown since the last drought. I have folks out there who take photographs of open land and then show me that open land a year or two later, filled with mandarins and pistachios. So because he's in Western Kern and there's no river and no groundwater there, he relies wholly on the state water project and then the Kern water bank, which fills up in flood years. And to farm that ground, he's now buying water from Boswell, has been. A good deal of it. The Boswells are selling $40, $50, $60 million of water. And the way they're doing that is they're selling their state water project water, but they're not reducing their footprint of agriculture. They're continuing to grow as a lot of acres of tomatoes and cotton and some pistachios now. And the way they're watering that is to pump more and more out of the earth, so much so that Corcoran, the Tulare Lake Basin, is sinking. One of the worst cases of subsidence in the world. So that's something different by many, many magnitudes from what's happening up where you guys are at. The other thing is that so much of the focus up there is on the Westlands Water District, the west side of Fresno County. And something interesting has happened there that a lot of folks, Westlands is, often and rightfully so painted as the big bad, actor in California water. But there's an evolution that's happened that complicates that a little bit. Westlands was born as a 600,000 acre farm irrigated water, the biggest in the world. But over the years, as the water has, it's gotten tougher to get that water out of the Delta, they're now down to 275,000 acres. They've retired the poor ground. Westlands has some poor ground. We know about what happened, the Kesterson tragedy and others from the perching of the groundwater and the selenium that happened. But they also have a couple 100,000 extraordinary acres of Pinoche loam, very rich ground. But right now they're farming 275,000 acres of high value crops. And so the question is should the water, I won't say rich, but let's say the folks that have more water up north, should they be selling that so Westlands could farm its 270,000 acres of prime ground, high value crops? The argument changes depending on how you view Westlands. So I just want to throw that little complication into it.
Let me jump in, Todd, if I could, and explain the role of AquAlliance in the North State. AquAlliance is a nonprofit based in Chico. Our mission is defending North State waters and defending them for agriculture, for urban uses, for environmental uses. Most relevant here is two lawsuits. The San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority and the Bureau of Reclamation both applied in 2015 for water transfers that would amount to 600,000 acre feet per year. So it would be scattered out over a 10-year period and variable. We, along with the Sports Fishing Association and other agencies, sued to prevent that. Those agencies revised their plans, came back with a revised plan for pumping from the north. It's still 600,000 acre feet per year. We have entered another lawsuit on a number of grounds. It fails to take into account potential ground subsidence. It doesn't adequately assess the damage to the environment in the north. So we remain hopeful. We would like to put a stop to the water transfers to the south. And as we say, it's money traveling south, not just water. So we think, along with, I think, Glenn-Colusa, we need to preserve what's up here in the north, make sure farmers have enough, the cities have enough, the environment has enough, and we can't repeat what happened in the south by shipping our water to the south, particularly for unsustainable crops like the almonds and the pistachios, which then get shipped to Japan, China, and elsewhere. Well,
I think I've been predicting an almond glut for 20 years, and it's finally come. We overplanted almonds, but we have a habit here in the San Joaquin Valley of planting crops to glut. When my grandfather came here in 1920, we had a series of raisin busts. And so we overplant because we have too much damn water. Had we decided from the get-go that only 50 to 60% of the river's flows would go to agriculture, we would have created a completely different farm economy. But when 95% of the flows were given to agriculture, that meant that poor ground was farmed the ground that should have never been farmed. So again, a little bit different of a culture down here. So on farm-to-farm transfers, I happen to see those, again, when you look at them individually, they don't seem like much, but you're saying 600,000 acre feet. So in the aggregate, that's a significant amount of water that's going. The crops here that are grown, I don't know that we want to get into a situation where the state is telling the farmer what to grow. Now, the problem with that is the one farmer follows the next, and pretty much, we've got 1.5 million acres of almonds, and now they're starting to pull them out. So there are these things that, when I look at it, farm to farm transfers make sense in certain situations. Farm to suburban transfers, those are the ones that scare me. But that's the one where we get the rise of suburbia, and I think we're just not looking at the reality. We can't continue to grow. We just can't. If we're going to take on more people, we need to increase our densities. But we cannot continue to sprawl agriculture and sprawl suburbia, given the reality of climate change. We just can't.
We've got a couple of good Q&A questions that are related to each other, and I want to ask this question on behalf of some of our attendees and then bring in some of our other panelists. First, Tom Cachot, fellow Orland High School graduate, asks, anybody that knows the North Valley knows that many, many acres of hardly farmed land is now in orchards on wells. It seems like a huge stress on my family well. Is that true? And in a related question, Melissa Doherty, the editor of the Chico News and Review, is tuned in, and she asks Mark, or she comments, Mark, you mentioned the gold rush ethos, and anecdotally anyway, we've seen massive orchards get planted in marginal cattle grazing land on the west side of the valley, like tons of them, and they're digging much deeper to get water. Can you address both those, Mark?
Yeah, they're both tragedies. I mean, it's just, it's a kind of madness and insanity. When I looked at Paradise and I saw how Butte County had made the decisions to allow that place to grow, the corruption that was involved and everything else, and then you multiply that out, you get this sense that the state basically allowed all that to happen. The state is not involved in land use. And I think, Pete Wilson years ago talked about urban growth boundaries and applying them to suburbia. But the question of growing on poor farmland, I mean, we're able to do it here and there is because this is the paradox of drip irrigation. Drip irrigation was touted as a way to save water. But what drip irrigation allows is the footprint of agriculture to expand on the ground that should never be farmed, because the drip can deliver the water and the chemical nutrients to a precise root zone. And so the ground itself is almost irrelevant. It's just there to stand up the tree. It's almost like hydroponic farming. So that is a crime that's been committed. And at the end of the book, I land after this in this chapter called Holy Water that starts at Mount Shasta and works its way down to the Delta. And then I come back to the San Joaquin Valley and I meet this farmer named the Oracle, and we just drive around Madera County, and he's showing me all the land that his grandfather and my grandfather would have never farmed. It was bad ground, and that's what's happened, and it's happening up there.
I'd love to bring in Ritta Martin, if I could, president of the Glenn County Farm Bureau. Obviously, we've talked with Thad about the irrigation district issues. Ritta, what should people know from your members? What would you like to get across on these issues?
Well, I'll go back to what Mark said at the beginning. It's so important not to divide the county and not to divide small farmers and big farmers, because there's not a farmer out there that wants to see success of their crop at the demise of their neighbor. I mean, it's our neighbors, it's our own domestic wells. But I'm not disagreeing with anything that's said. It makes my heart hurt as a sixth generation. I live on a cattle ranch up here in Western Glenn County, and there's ground that we used to run the biggest flock of sheep in the county on, and it's turning into trees.
Yeah.
I definitely agree that, we don't want government regulation necessarily telling us what we can plant, what we can't plant, but agriculture has to be sustainable, and we have to, protect water supply for everyone. So it's having conversations like this and educating and being able to work with each other is the only way we can go forward.
Yeah, we got to pressure DWR to really, really do what, to fulfill the promise of Sigma. I mean, it can be a major tool. Is it going to solve everything? No, but if it's done right, gosh darn, it's taken so long. But if it's done right, we can make a big push towards sustainability with agriculture, and then we have to bring in a Sigma for suburbia.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've looked at some of the projects that have been proposed in the Colusa subbasin and the Corning subbasin, and there's going to be a lot of improvements to come, but we can't wait for this to happen. We're going to drought ourselves to death if we wait for the Sigma process. So there's got to be some steps, more immediate steps within the county to help.
Yeah.
Guidelines or support. I don't know what the answer is, but we can't wait. We can't wait for it to rain, and we can't wait for Sigma to solve our problems. We all know that.
I'd like to ask Ritta, I realize that everybody's kind of danced around the idea of, we don't want to tell farmers what to plant, but when you see all of these trees going in areas that were grazing areas, like we're seeing now in North Chico, areas on the Vina Plains that have never been planted. Those were always, that was always grazing land, and that's some of the worst land there is. So it's happening. And what I'm being told is everybody's trying to establish their water use before they're told what to do.
Yep.
In essence, we're like hurrying up, we're racing to the bottom, as Mark has said. And we're doing it by planting these orchards. I understand there's 29,000 new acres of orchards in Tehama. I'm not sure what it is in Glenn, but there's 29,000 in Tehama, another several thousand, couple dozen thousand in Glenn. In Butte County, we were pretty much built out, we thought, and then we started seeing all of these orchards going into grazing land. So
orchards. Wait. You said orchards going into grazing land?
Yes. Yeah, and then in between in Capay, which is primarily over in Glenn County. I grew up in Corning, born in Chico, 6th generation. There weren't a lot of orchards over there, maybe 1 or 2 orchards, and now you're seeing a lot of orchards in Capay. Yeah, and all of that is on groundwater, all of it.
I want to clarify, Debra, you do not mean orchards turning into grazing land. You mean grazing land becoming orchards.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And so, but I'm being told that's so farmers can establish their water use. I just wondered if somebody could address that. That's
true? That's true. We've seen a lot of farmers, again, it's the unintended consequence of a new law that has that much of a run-up. You see them trying to establish a historic use of 5, 10, 15 years, and they're just pumping more. And often these are hedge funds, pension funds, the Royal Canadian Mounties, the Mormon Church are coming in with big resources and putting wells in black alkali ground, okay, just to establish that taking. So then Sigma will have to account for that taking. Man, it really almost brings tears to your eyes. It does actually bring tears to your eyes to see what's happening. And I don't know.
Hey,
Yeah.
Todd, could I
Please
interject?
This Mayor Roundy, please.
Yeah, I'm the mayor of Orland, which has been mentioned a few times. And we have our own wells that provide potable water for our citizens. So there is a concern. I think there were 70 or 80 wells that went dry in and around Orland. Now that's when it gets real. If you want to talk about transfers or something like that to these people, it's not going to go well. But to dovetail on planting of orchards, and the northern part of Glenn County, if you look at it, then I think it's southwest, is the really driest area in Glenn County. Now, if you go down to Willow south, they have lots of water. So it's kind of like the state, where there's certain parts of our basin, which I'm on the water authority for Sigma, which our plan is supposed to be complete, done at this point by the first of the year. So the farmers, the county, and the cities of Willows and Orland are working really well together. Surprisingly, I was a little worried when I first went on there that it would get a little more contentious. The county has also had moratoriums on having new wells dug, but it was kind of interesting back in 16 and 15. They announced they were going to do that, but then about 1,500 wells were approved before they could get to it. The same thing is happening right now. And there's all kinds of orchards, which I'm not saying is bad, good, or indifferent. It's just reality is going in on the western part of the northern part where there's not a lot of groundwater. So yeah, push comes to shove here. If we're going to monitor and have sustainability here, and Mark, that made a big impression on me when I saw that picture with the guy with the pole, and it's just amazing. And that subsidence here is started a little bit, not much, not much at all, but those are scary things. I mean, what you're talking about, your infrastructure, everything. So I skimmed through your book. I just got it from Todd. It was very interesting. It's what's going on. And like in our town, we do have a plan from 2016 on conserving water. We conserved, and we still do today, I'm really proud of them, 28% to 30% we conserved on what we were consuming. And that's a lot of water, 30% for our little town of 8,500 now. So
how big is Orland? How many people?
8,500 now.
Okay, and what is the state requiring you to do to build new affordable houses to meet your goal? How many a year?
Off the top of my head, we have 2% growth every year, which is one of the higher growth rates up here. I can't tell you off the top of my head exactly how many, but the arena numbers and those numbers, we've got 85 new homes that are going to be built which is an improvement. We haven't had mid cost between $300,000 $400,000 homes. Before it was chip housing, which was low income.
Is that ag water? Is that ag water? Is that agricultural water that's being transferred to suburbia to do that?
No, we have our own wells. We have 6 wells.
Okay, and how much?
We monitor that every week now. We keep close eye on it, so we know exactly. And it's not a panic time for us.
Right.
It's 30 to 60 feet. It's been there, surface water. It's been there for a number of years, and it fluctuates between there. So we're real solid as far as the Tehama aquifer that runs under us. Also, Stony Creek fan, which comes from the Black Butte Dam, has kept us recharged. Now that's a problem. The recharge is a problem because now you got wells
along
anywhere from 20, I don't know how they lasted that long, to 100 and 120 feet are going dry.
The reason I ask is we have an area north of Fresno, just across the San Joaquin River. Fresno kind of sprawled all the way to the river, and now it's jumping over the river into Madera County. And Madera County, the aquifer there is in a collapse right now. In the last 6-8 weeks, it's dropped 50, 60 feet. And this is extraordinary, okay? And the problem is that was historically ag land, served by the Madera Irrigation District, which was part of the Central Valley Project. But at some point, the Madera Irrigation District got into some financial trouble, and they started selling their water to suburbia. And now they're building a new town right there in Madera, a new town along the river. They want 30,000 people there, and they don't have the water to serve it. The way they were able to get the green light on the entitlements was to show a bunch of water transfers that were just paper water. So now Madera Irrigation District has this, they're in a dilemma. Do we serve our ag guys and is that, to continue the tradition of that? Or do we have to now take water from the ag and move it to suburbia so these faucets don't go dry? Now you're a ways away from that, but that's happening in cities in the Central Valley. And
that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Very unfortunate. We're not in that situation at all. Thank God. I didn't.
Yet. Isn't that the key word though there? I mean, and maybe this is sacrilege in this community, and we'll see if I can still show up at the Farwood Bar and be served with this comment. In other areas of real estate property, there is zoning and it's specific land use. Why not in agriculture, and why not in the greater interest of the community? Perhaps a naive question, but why can't the government come in and say, on this field crops, not trees?
Well, that used to be understood by farmers.
Right.
That was it was natural selection, if you will. It didn't need to be legislated. People knew what to grow and where to grow and how well it was going to grow. But that is not what's happening now. Now it's just a race to establish water use. Doesn't matter where it is.
I'm on, Todd, I'm on the LAFCO in our county, and that's one of our objectives. Number one is to protect prime farmland from anything like that happening. So we're very aware of it, and it's not happening in Glenn County.
Well, you got to learn the lesson. You got to learn the lesson of down here. Really, this is this is the lesson for you up there. You've got more time, more water, and please don't do what we've done, which is keep demanding, going up against that limit line and demand more and more and more.
Yeah, we're going to have to shut it off.
Yeah.
Can you be specific?
Whether it's metering, we're monitoring, we're doing all the things. I think there's 6 elements in a Sigma plan, and all those have to be addressed. And one of the things that we learned right away is that if we don't do it, the state will come in, which that gets your attention.
Yes.
So the farmers and all of us are talking together pretty much. I think Thad will concur that does have some impact on what we're trying to do in our Kehn Glen Basin.
Right. Yeah, Todd, if I could just add, I know one of the things that we do as a district is we actually go through a water allocation process where we allocate water to our landowners, and they have to basically prove to us how and where they're going to use that water, and they need to show that they are basically in balance. And if they are not, you need to take an action like, well, we didn't allocate you enough water, so you actually need to set aside part of your ground because you don't have enough water based on the water we're allocating to you here to irrigate everything. And so, I think Sigma potentially has to go down that type of a route of allocating water or groundwater. And based on that, then you say, well, then how do you limit that use? Does everybody get a pro rata amount of that? Is it first in time, first in right? I don't think that's law, but that could be another approach. But, we're going to have to do something like that. And just like we kind of, in essence, regulate land use a little bit because landowner, you don't have that water to grow that crop. It is kind of not saying we're restricting your land use. We're just saying you have to take other options. And I think, one of the interesting things about Sigma was, we were a pretty strong proponent, we as a district and some of the, water agencies wanted SGMA to have some land use ability, authority, if you will, but the counties were actually the ones who opposed that because they are the ultimate land use authority. So, at some point as we go forward, we look forward to partnering with the counties to see, do you put in land use? I mean, you need a land use change to go from ag to municipal or change in zoning, but right now ag is exempt in most cases. So do you do something where you say, well, if you want to switch crops, you need to go through some sort of a permitting process, through a zoning process? I know there's a lot of concerns about, land rights and things like that, but I think it is a question we're gonna have to ask ourselves.
I think property rights, the primacy of property rights, something that has ruled America and even California, as progressive and liberal as we think we are. Don't tread on property rights, but at some point, climate change is going to require. I mean, look at in Florida. Should Florida continue to build condos along the coast when that water is rising and rising and rising and going beneath and weakening, that subterranean? I mean, at some point, the things that we hesitated doing in the past, the things that were not politically correct, the things that were looked at as tyranny, boy, climate change ends up, creating a kind of recalculation there. So are we there now? I would say in certain parts of California we are. You guys, I've always felt there's more sanity up there. There's more of a culture of small farming. Okay, here it's different. But hearing about some of these acreages that have gone in since the last drought, that's quite disturbing.
I want to get to some of our Q&A questions in just a second, but the one panelist that we haven't had a chance to hear from yet is David Kehn of the Cal Water and the Glenn Groundwater Authority Technical Advisory Committee. David, not to put you on the spot, but as you're listening to this, what's going on in your mind that you would like to add that you think folks would benefit from knowing based on your insights and your experience?
I think for me, one of the areas that I am focused on, obviously, is as a water provider, is urban development and urban water supply. And here in Chico, up in Butte County, from 2000 to 2020, although we've continued to see growth, we've continued to see our service area expand, our water consumption has remained the same. And that's largely through improvements in water fixtures, people's behaviors. The drought had a huge impact on that, on changing people's behaviors. So I see hope there. Obviously, we will hit the end of that when growth outruns the way how much people can conserve. But through low impact development, water neutral development, there is hope there. As we head into this drought and conservation's on everybody's mind, I continue to tell myself that we are all water managers. And that's, as I manage a huge district with 100,000 people, then at my house with my bucket and my shower. And so I try and empower our 100,000 customers to each take it into their own hands and manage their water consumption.
Is water the water from paradise? Is there something happening with that where it might be coming down the ridge to the valley to pave the way for more growth? Are there some things happening with water over there that would change maybe what you're talking about a bit?
There is currently what's called an option study. So Paradise has kicked off an option study to look at the suite of alternatives that would make them a viable water district, both with their water supply, but also financially. So there's a variety of things they could do. That is one alternative they're looking at. From a Chico perspective, it's complicated because we are 100% groundwater. Therefore, our distribution system was built and designed to support that with many wells throughout the system. But of course, if that's an option that provides viability to a neighboring agency, that's something we'd be interested in. But they're just in the beginning stages of that actually data gathering. So anybody on this call who has thoughts and things like that is open and happy to participate.
I want to go through a few of our Q&A questions, some really good ones coming in. The latest is from Wade Warrens. He asks, how much aquifer monitoring is the government currently doing in Butte, Glenn, and Tehama counties? And does SGMA require that? And just in the spirit of, I always have to ask the dumb question, just in case anyone's wondering, SGMA is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so that, as Mark said earlier, is taking quite a while to kick in. But again, Warren's question is, how much aquifer monitoring is the government currently doing in Butte, Glenn, and Tehama counties? Debra, is that something you can address?
Yeah, well, I can say that, you know, we've had a water department for over 22 years. And, you know, currently the head of our water department just went to work for DWR. And he is now going to be the top dog at the deputy director for SGMA at the state level.
What's his name?
Paul Goslin.
Okay.
And I would say that, you know, we have monitored the aquifer in Butte. But again, I think what is occurring is we know that, you know, just like fire, just like the air we breathe, water doesn't know when it crosses a county line or when, you know, there's that arbitrary marker. And what I see as a challenge in SGMA is how we are going to collaborate between subbasins. What is that going to look like? How are we going to come to agreements? Because we might be doing everything in one basin, but if the basin next to us is doing something which causes, you know, like for instance, we are in the shallow end of the aquifer. Glenn County is really in the deep end of the aquifer. So we share this aquifer, yet we're all in separate basins. So I think that's going to be the challenge of SGMA, is for all of us to come together. And the other challenge I see with SGMA, you know, just this is an offhand way of answering this question. Somebody brought up, you know, the county's in charge of land use. Well, the JPAs that have been formed, the GSAs that have been formed, they are really charged with, are we going to monitor wells? Are we going to do this or that? But they don't have that land use piece. So there is going to be some very interesting things that are going to have to occur between counties and cities and with the farm community and with these GSAs. It's a dance that I don't think anyone has ever really attempted. And I think it's going to come down to also being played out somewhat in the courts, because I don't think that everyone's going to be happy with some of the decisions. So I see SGMA as a really fine tool. I think we needed to do this. I think that it is forcing us to look at our groundwater. It's looking at, we have been doing this for over 22 years, and we've seen a 20-foot drop in our aquifer over that, you know, it's about a foot a year that we see. So, and we've measured that, and we kind of know exactly where we are, but it's unprecedented now what is occurring. Just like what you said down in San Joaquin Valley, 50 or 60 feet, we're seeing unprecedented things as well. And that's being combined with farm growth, urban growth, you know, and then climate change on top of that. It sounds like a mixture for disaster.
Yes.
I'd like to jump in with another Q&A question, unless you have more to say on that, Mark.
No. Hey, Todd, I got a quick question for you. Are you, have we had, I'm seeing some interruption in the service. Are you getting any of that from my end, or are you seeing that too?
I'm good so far, Mark. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dave Golnick, another Orland native, asks, what about the future of projects like the Sites Reservoir? Should we put any hope in that? He doesn't ask about the hope. That was my addition. But
you know, Sites is maybe a little bit different than the 7th dam they want to put on the San Joaquin River. I mean, how much water can you squeeze out of a river that's having, you know, scarcity issues already? I'm a fan of water banking. There are some basins in the San Joaquin Valley where you can park in flood years 1 million acre feet of water. I think that makes more sense here. I don't know. Sites may argue for itself. I haven't really looked at it that carefully.
AquAlliance also has a lot of reservations about sites. including the fact that the Cottonwood Creek drainage area, which would flow directly into sites along with Sac River water, is filled with minerals like cinnabar and chromium. It's dubious that the water that would go into sites would be could be returned to the river, that it might well just have to sit there. There are also salt flats on which that reservoir would be built. So we think sites is a very dubious proposition, and it doesn't make any more water. It depends on those occasions when there's a flood season and a little bit of extra water. So we remain opposed to sites.
Thad, I know GCID is a party to the sites project. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, we've been an advocate for the project for a long time. Going back to the 50s when the department studied it. I still think we are today. Obviously, we're part of the Joint Powers Authority, and I think one of the things that has happened, from a pretty significant standpoint, is just that the Sac Valley agencies and interests, including the counties, have taken more of an interest of making this a local project. Before it was pretty much a DWR, Bureau of Reclamation, one of these large projects. Build it and the money will show up, and I think we all know that that's just not the case. So we've really downsized the project. To Mark's point, really focused on what you can take out of the river from a sustainable standpoint, and that's obviously decreased the size of the project in terms of yield. To Stephen's point, a clarification, it's not part of Cottonwood Creek. I think maybe you're thinking of Stone Corral Creek, maybe. But there are a couple creeks, and there are some footprint issues that we need to address, and I think we're in the process of doing that. But I think one of the things that sites really offers is, it's a huge benefit to the environment. In terms of operations of Shasta and Orville reservoirs, like we're seeing this year, there's just a lot of challenging operations regarding to water supply, trying to benefit the species. So having another reservoir to sort of balance some of those needs would be significant. And given its location, you can just do a lot of things like move water down from Shasta, park it for a few minutes or a few days, hours, months if you need to. You can do fish releases out of Shasta, recapture that water at sites and move it at a different time for another environmental benefit. So it just provides a lot of opportunities based on its location. So, and then it does have some water supply benefits. So, I think we certainly welcome, folks, concerns. We want to address those, but again, some of the opportunities, so where it can benefit our region, our collective region, including everybody here. I think that's what we're interested to hear. So again, we think it's a pretty significant opportunity. It's probably one of the last opportunities that California will receive. So we want to make sure we get it right.
I would like to jump in on that one.
Go ahead, Debra.
Yeah, I agree with the idea of sites, but I have been attending those meetings and specifically asking about the metals issues and some of the land issues, some of the things, because just over the mountain, we have the lake that you can't eat the fish out of, the natural lake over there, for some of the same reasons, all the heavy metals and some of that sitting water. When the water sits there, what is that going to look like? And we haven't gotten really good answers on that yet, Thad. I've been waiting for some of those answers, but one of the main documents that I read was from a DWR water environmentalist scientist who basically laid out why that would be such a bad location. I think it's a good location from all the standpoint that you just mentioned, but in terms of the environment, I'm very curious about the answer to those questions. So I'm in favor of storage. I just don't know if that's the right spot because of those reservations expressed by this DWR scientist who has since retired.
Thad, this is Bruce. I think it has a lot to do with the Delta, does it not? As far as environment and helping the Delta survive, and those tunnels, those forbidden tunnels from the north anyway. That's part of the equation, is it not?
Yeah, Bruce. I mean, but I think the other thing we really looked at is making sure the project would provide benefit to in-stream species, particularly salmon, so we have 4 different runs of salmon that use the Sacramento River. So if sites
Exactly.
can help balance, the water supply there, it can also provide a delta outflow benefit for delta smelt. That's
There
another
you go. Yeah.
benefit. We've been talking to California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I mean, we're strong advocates of this project will generate a block of water for the environment. And we really want to make sure that folks are invested in how that block of water will be beneficially used. And again, primarily right now, it's been the California Department of Fish and Wildlife leading that, but we've tried to reach out to other NGOs as well, just to say, what are your thoughts here? Again, it's a huge opportunity and we don't want to miss it.
I want to jump in. Oh, go ahead, Mark, please.
I was just going to say that I kind of, alluded to this earlier, but really it's what you guys do up there that is going to serve as an example for the rest of California. We've been industrialized for a long time here, agriculture. You guys haven't, and we're hard baked into this way. I mean, we brought the plantation here from the South, literally. When the cotton growers came and drained the rest of Tulare Lake dry. Those kinds of takings haven't happened up there. So you've got maybe 30 years on us, and we're looking to your example to try to figure it all out. There's a different culture up there. Every time I come up there, it's smaller farmers with 5, 6 generations in the ground, And even the ones that aren't 5, 6 generations, like Craig McNamara. I mean, these are people that have an ethic that isn't necessary, it isn't extraction. So our hope is you. If you can figure this out, maybe you give us an example.
Thanks, Mark.
So I can
That's
see
quite a load.
The sun is starting to set over Vincent Haler Park and Lollipop Land to my west. So I want to make sure to get in a few more of our Q&A questions. Elizabeth Larson, who is also a journalist from Capay, the Capay district originally, and is a fellow Orland High School graduate, along with myself, and currently the editor of Lake County News, asks a really interesting question that's a little bit different than things we've been talking about. There's a lot of discussion about more traditional ag products, but she'd like to hear Mark's thoughts on the cannabis industry. Over here on the North Coast, projects that each use millions of gallons of water a month are being paraded through local planning commissions, and there's next to no adequate study of their water impacts. That seems like an area that's going to cause California huge challenges. What's your take on that, Mark?
Yeah, I welcome that question. In a book of essays I did called West of the West, one of the chapters was called The Highlands of Humboldt. And I drove up to Humboldt not knowing that I was driving, to this place that was roiling with this debate over diesel dope. So much dope was being grown in the mountains on diesel generators, and those generators and a lot of the chemicals that were used, the bat guana and everything else, were polluting creeks and polluting rivers. So, growing dope is it definitely is creating its own footprint and own impacts. And right now, that the fire up in the shadow of Mount Shasta, I mean, the firefighters were literally, battling with Hmong growers who used to grow strawberries down here and found that it was more lucrative to go up there and grow dope. And they were digging in this lava rock, and it came close to some fighting going on. I guess the firefighters were dropping chemicals onto the blaze that was destroying the cannabis crop. So another collision of cultures and everything else. It's really fascinating.
Steve Nordby has a question that I think, Steve, might be a good question for me to follow up on and answer for you journalistically, because I don't know that anyone would know this off the top of their head, but let me pose it anyway. Talking about the new growth, if Orland adds 100 homes, how much water on average would that number of homes use? Mayor Roundy, you gave me so many pop quizzes in history class that I feel like I need to turn the tables here on you. I don't expect you to know that off the top of your head, though, necessarily.
Well, the allocation is each family has 15,000 gallons per month. The thing is, it's billed every 2 months, so it's kind of convoluted at times, but that may give you an idea. And then after that, they're charged, oh, I can't remember now. The next 1,000 is charged more money. And that's part of our plan too. There's a 4-tier plan on conservation. And as we go up to tier 2, tier 3, all those costs go up to help curtail consumption. But anyway, that's as close as I can get. It's 15,000 gallons per family. And then of course what they use. And they've been pretty good with that. They don't want to spend the money. So what do we got? Well, I think it's 85 homes that are going to go in.
And really, Orland is looking for that kind of growth. It's been relatively stagnant in terms of its population, and that's one of the things that I've been looking at with the Amazon facility coming in southeast of town. And the
you guys are done, man. You guys are done.
Trust me, I know.
You know,
yeah.
I don't know how many of you saw Bill Maher go on his rant about almonds a couple weeks ago.
Mark, I do want to say you keep using this word almonds. I'm not familiar with this.
Well, I know. Wait, listen, south of
almonds? Okay. Oh, almonds.
Brother, miss, south south of Modesto, it's almonds. Okay.
Got it. Anyway, Bill Maher, is that who you're talking about?
Yeah. So the comedian, he's basically saying that I'm having to reduce my showers so these guys can grow more almonds. Okay. And what is an almond? It's just goes into it's going elsewhere, and it goes into trail mix. We can do without almonds, but here's where he's just got it all wrong. What he's basically proposing is that LA needs to get more water. I mean, they ran out of their LA River a century and some ago, and they went up and over the mountain 230 miles away to steal Owens Valley's water. So now I guess what he's proposing is that, hey, the almond farmers of the San Joaquin Valley, who are in, large part growing their almonds with their own backyard water, that's not water that's being taken from LA, but what he wants to do is come up and over the mountain and take that water that's growing almonds to grow more suburbs across the Southern California desert. And this is where it's so easy to do this zero-sum game, but it's so dishonest.
Mark, you didn't have to bow to that peer pressure. Come on.
No.
Mike Vershagen says, just a comment, it's not entirely true that orchards use more water than field crops. Mike is using less applied water to orchards than when we were growing field crops such as alfalfa, seed crops, and forage crops. Using less applied water by conservation methods has had a negative impact on groundwater recharge, which gets to a question that Tom Cachot really wants answered, and that is, how does a municipality and irrigation district go about recharging the aquifer? And I know that the flood irrigation that used to take place prior to some of the techniques that Mike is talking about was part of that. And it's a little bit of a catch-22. I don't know if anybody on the panel can sort of explain that from their perspective. Mark?
No, I'll punt that to somebody else.
Yeah, Todd, I can take that. Maybe just at least talk about our perspective, and maybe kind of using the canal behind you in Orland as an example. But I mean, most of us with surface water up here are using surface water applications. So a lot of it, it isn't drip actually. It's either going to be furrow or flood irrigation. So, the canal behind you is concrete lined, and I think that's either for minimizing seepage and losses or for erosion control. A couple different uses of lining a canal. For our system, GCID, we have about 800 miles of unlined canals. So we deliver water through all that unlined canal. It actually is seeping, on a minute, hourly, daily basis. And that water that seeps out of our system recharges the groundwater table. And then also when we have landowners, irrigate, all that water that they irrigate with is not used by the crop. Typically with BIP or whatever, you're almost all the water applied through an emitter is actually consumptively used by the crop, which is a benefit because you minimize losses. But like per Mike's note, you don't get the recharge through that effort. So, in our case, using that surface water application, we still get a component of recharge. So, for us, that's really significant in maintaining, groundwater elevations and quantity within our district. And I just want to add on to Debra's note, not only do, a lot of the counties and us agencies do monitoring, but the Department of Water Resources Northern District does as well. And they actually have a really great library of groundwater mapping that they've done for a long time that provides a great historical record that can actually go look and start to see, up in the northern valley, Sacramento Valley, just kind of, how groundwater is recharging, being depleted, where there's problems, where isn't problems. So it's just a great resource.
How many of those new acres up there, which you guys estimate are going up on hillsides, which then would require drip irrigation?
I would say all the new ones. I mean, the bulk of them. I mean, most of the districts. I mean, our district is pretty much built out. We just have crop changing. Like a rice field may go to an orchard or something like that. But a lot of that new development is actually going up into the foothills or land that hasn't been historically irrigated before. It's basically a new demand on the groundwater system that never existed there before. And that's ultimately another one of our concerns, is because ultimately we're in a valley, and the bottom of that valley is the Sacramento River. And so, theoretically, every drop that you pump out and use isn't water that gets back to the river, and that causes problems with flows for fish and other things like that. So I mean, there's just a lot of impacts that, again, we think as a region we really need to rally around and try and find solutions for.
Yeah, I think a great story right now would be for an enterprising journalist to basically look at the footprint of agriculture, what it's done since 2017, the end of that drought, that historic drought. How many new acres have gone in on ground that was not agriculture before, and that will speak to a kind of communal madness.
We actually did that. We had a statistical engineer who did a study on Tehama, Butte, and Glenn counties. She's a former statistical engineer with J&J, and she used USDA reports, looked at the crop usage and the types, and then she actually compared it to the San Joaquin Valley, and we are on the same trajectory as the San Joaquin Valley.
You there?
Yep.
Yes. I don't know what just happened.
Oh, that was me. I'm attempting to share my screen.
Oh.
So I let me show you. Maybe I'll go back and stop the share and then come back. So this is in fact something that I've tracked, and it's fascinating to see the increase in acreage for orchards in Glenn County in just the past 3 years. I unfortunately I can't get that to share, but it is going to, I believe it's going to reach a point potentially in the next ag report for 2020 when it comes out in, I believe, August, where fruit and nut acreage is going to, for the first time in Glenn County, surpass field crop acreage.
Wow. What are these almonds principally? I mean, because we have an almond glut.
Yeah, almonds and walnuts.
Okay, well, almonds, we got a glut. I mean, the farmers here were, at 4, 5, 6 years ago was $5 a pound. It's like what, about $1.75 now? Thad, help us out on that.
Thad, you're muted, and maybe you just don't want to jump in on this one.
I don't. That's not the Rita, so I don't know.
Rita, this is
Mark,
the Farm Bureau.
I can help him out there a little bit. Mark, I'd like you to, it'd be interesting for you to see, because it's been, Debra would probably know too. You overlay, I think it was like in the 70s, and then there's an overlay of maps of new wells just in Glenn County, and it's amazing. I mean,
Yeah, no,
the straws all of a sudden that are going in, and also I would mention, I'm yelling. I would mention west of town, it's rolling hills full of almonds, as you say.
Yeah, I think that's, I followed the footprint of agriculture basically from the 1890s to 2017. And I thought maybe that historic ground, that drought would maybe change the pattern. I mean, that's the question I asked Stuart Resnick at the end. What was the lesson of this drought, this 6 years? And he said, well, we shouldn't be planting where there's not water.
Oh.
He didn't heed his own lessons. So I don't know. I think that's a really interesting story. I saw the Sacramento Bee did something on the footprint of suburbia in the wildland urban interface. I thought that was good journalism. I think it's time for someone to take a look at the ag side of that and see how much has grown. And, is it cheaper to grow almonds up there than it is here? That's a question I have, because maybe you guys can get by with $1.75 a pound price.
Is Ritta still on?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
And I can't speak directly to the price, but I mean, we have a custom almond harvest business, and the demand is much exceeding, what we can harvest every year. And I don't know if it's because I feel like things are not cheaper up here, but.
Oh, wow.
I think there's well, I don't know. I think that, again, this goes back to stigma. It is, people are, feeling forced to plant ground and establish water use. And, they're going with what they know. And they know almonds and they know walnuts. And so that's what's going in the ground. There, in our particular area, it's more walnuts. When I go to Tehama, I see more almonds over there. And in Glenn, I see more almonds over there.
Right.
Any olives going in?
Olives are being torn out.
Wow.
And there's a natural crop. They love that, they love that red dirt. They love that dirt of Tehama County, but there's these old beautiful trees that are just getting ripped out.
Yeah, that table, Mark, but olive oil, of course, now that's a different story. There's a lot of acres now up here in Glenn County that is olive oil. Because it's so mechanized, it's pretty easy to take care of.
Yeah. I was on Dino Cortopassy's land a few years ago. We're doing some really interesting things there, and they had that their olive oil business pretty dialed in.
Well, we're coming to the end here, and Mark, I want to give you the last word. But Melissa Doherty, the editor of the Chico News and Review, asked a question that I think potentially sets us up well for a big picture takeaway.
Sure.
Her question is the increase in dry wells that we're seeing, the canary in the coal mine, in terms of potential subsidence, et cetera, and what can be done to protect the aquifer. I think that is the key question that's on everybody's mind, because that is in our common interest, and I think that's a key question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, how far are we out from the actual implementation of SGMA, and how much damage can be done in the meantime? It's a scary question. I don't know. And then we have to make sure that Department of Water Resources is girded to take on all the experts that big ag and medium and small ag are going to bring to bear on these sustainability models.
Yeah.
It's going to be you're looking at an adjudication of all sorts of different basins. It's going to jumpstart that. Are we going to end up in courts? And is this thing going to be a disaster? I don't know. But I hope to follow it and see what's happening. First of all, I like to say, Todd, you've done an incredible job with this thing. Really, and the questions and everything else. This has been one of the best forums I've been on in the two and a half years since the book came out. Really appreciate what you've done, and you know, there was no BS when I said that. I think in the same way that you have found the farmers up there have found a way to utilize rice water to send it down alongside you know, those byways of the river, and to actually grow fish. That's where the ideas are going to come from. You know, I hope to see one day that Tulare Lake comes back to life. That most dominant feature in the California map finds a way to come back. I don't know. It's but climate change, the pressure that's brought to bear by it, could actually be an ally in some weird way if we let it.
Mark, what gives you hope? Is there anything out there that you see that gives you hope that we can take away? I don't mean to be Pollyanna, but is there something here that we can hold on to and look to have a more sustainable future for all of us in terms of our water?
I'm finding more and more farmers who are strongly, conservative, acknowledging that this is climate change, that it's just not California's inherent weather. And if we can get folks, there's so much, we have red state California and blue state California, but if we can get a conversation now, the vaccination issue, the masks and all that seem like, oh man, there's not much hope. But if we can get folks to concede that we're in a moment, we're in climate change, then that opens up, I think, that obligates government to maybe get involved and partner up with the private folks in a way that makes the farmers comfortable and government comfortable, and we can, we cannot grow any more paradises, that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's complicated. I wish I could be more hopeful, but I think we're in this time where pressure is coming and the cracks are growing, and maybe those cracks will open up some possibilities.
Well, I want to thank our panel, starting with Debra Lucero, the Butte County Supervisor. She turned me on to your book originally, Mark. I was reading Cadillac Desert by the late Mark Reisner, and Debra, I don't know if this is original, but she described Cadillac Desert as the Old Testament of water, and your book as the new.
I'm going to steal that. That's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Debra, thank you so much, and I'm very glad you were able to participate along with Ritta Martin, Glenn County Farm Bureau President, Stephen Tchudi, AquAlliance Board Chair, Bruce Roundy, Orland Mayor, and my former teacher. I'm very grateful to him for joining. Thad Bettner from Glenn-Colusa Irrigation District, and David Kehn of CalWater and the Glenn Groundwater Authority Technical Advisory Committee. I'm going to take the video, make it available to folks. We're going to write it up, and I'm just extremely grateful to you, Mark. The audiobook is excellent. You're kind of the Clint Eastwood of water as well. if you can listen to that. The audiobook, frankly.
I tell you, that was the most miserable indoor job I've ever had in my life, man. I'd go in that studio. It was near the airport of Fresno. Jets were taking off. I'd have to stop. My stomach would, make its noises. I'd have to stop. Couldn't even hear it, but the recording could. And man, I got out of there in 2 weeks, and I can't imagine anybody wanting to listen to that, but I guess it's all right. But thank you. Can you give us, the folks in the panel, can you send me their emails if it's all right with them, and we can continue this conversation? I'd be particularly interested in seeing some of those statistics on acreage growing.
Absolutely. I'll double check with everyone, but I'm sure that's fine. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us. Great questions in the Q&A. We had more than 40 participants online throughout, and everybody stuck with us. And this is a critical issue. I'm very grateful to everyone for their time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say farewell from Lateral 40, and bountiful water to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd.
All right.
Go for a swim.
Okay.
Go for a swim back
No
there.
quizzes. No quizzes, young man.
Thanks, Mr. Roundy.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.